It's another week, it's another Friday, and we're back once again. Episode 14. Wow, I didn't even think that. I mean, I knew I was going to be able to be consistent, but I just felt like it's already a few days ago that I started, but episode 14 means that's like we've been here for 13 weeks. That's because I did 2 episodes in the first week, and wow, this has been quite a journey because we've dealt with quite a lot, and I mean, it's been amazing. Thank you for coming on this ride with me. And usually this is helping me, is teaching me. It's a learning process for me, and a learning, unlearning, and relearning process for me, because these are questions and things that I have had to ask myself, and issues that I have had to deal with, and other people, and things that I've noticed. So I don't just come to tell a story or have a conversation. I actually read and learn and understand, and it's helping me, and I hope that it's helping someone else as well, and doing this has been extremely fulfilling. So thank you for always pressing play and zoning. I forgot my manners. How have you been? I didn't even check on you guys. How are you? How has your week been? My week has been great, trying to set boundaries and the things that, get me going, and, I'm learning, relearning, getting my mind right, focusing on what's important for me and the goals. And my biggest inspiration for doing this has been my children, because I feel like I need to give them better. I need to be better. And today we're going to talk about childhood trauma. It's a topic that's extremely important for me, because trauma does affect how we think, whether we like it or not, whether we even know that the trauma exists or it doesn't. It's already created a part in our brain. Now, when I learned that, it was mind-blowing for me, because even the way that I read the Bible has changed, because I realized that I can actually create parts in my mind by what I feed my soul. And I now understand why God says, meditate on the word, let it be in your heart. It's like stew on it, marinate on it, like let it enter into you, because God created the brain, and He knows that by doing those things you are creating certain parts and thoughts. Now, can you imagine how powerful that is? So when I read the Bible in the light of those things that I know, my perception and my perspective is so different. I feel like I'm becoming a totally different human from what I'm more improved person of the person that I was. That's why I understand. That's why God said, meditate on my presence. Let the word be in you. Don't worry. Don't be anxious. Don't fear. Because He knows that those things create a path. I didn't even realize that a lot of the things that, we go through have the potential to create a path in your brain, and they also subconsciously create patterns which impact on the choices we make. I had to personally re-examine the choices I made, as a child growing up, and then some of the choices I made through the lenses of some of my trauma, right? Mind you, up until therapy, I didn't even think some of the incidents had affected me. And then when my therapist will ask me a question, it will just be normal cruise mood. The patterns that I'm used to, I'll answer them. And she's like, no, you're not answering the question. You're using the similar patterns. It had to take care of 1 session or 2. Third session, before she drew my mind, I had to start now consciously going back and then kind of thinking about those experiences and relaying them through my lenses of what I know and how I express them and how they affect the choices. And then the biggest question that unraveled for me was when she asked me for an incident that I recounted. How did that make you feel? And then I went back into that point and what I wanted to say as a child and what I want to say now and how it made me feel. That's when I realized that it was powerful. Because you see, what I didn't realize was that I was making certain choices by default of the fact that that situation had happened. And it was just because I hadn't dealt with it. I didn't even realize it was a root cause. You get what I mean? It was something that had happened. I stored it away in my memory. I knew what happened. But in terms of how it made me feel, navigating it, how it's made me make certain choices, express myself, I didn't even think about it in that light. You get what I mean? Now, I realized that those things have played a big role. And I mean, like I always said, I grew up in a high conflict home with my father being the antagonist and my mother trying to shield us from what she assumed we were unaware of. And eventually me standing up to my father at some point. And then, he would, because I knew something wasn't right. And I was just trying to protect everyone in that sense, my own way. And so he would say things like, you're just like your mother. Now, those words really affected me because in a way, he was trying to get to her and trying to say you're not good enough or you're at fault and criticizing her. Now, subconsciously, what that does is it creates a path in my mind that you're not good enough. You're not worthy. You're trying to be the best all the time because it's a point you have to prove. But I didn't need to prove any point. Just by the fact that God created me, I was worthy, And those things, those words just kind of impacted me, and I kind of tried to be a calm, soothing person. I am that person, right? But I overtried it and I was overcommitted to it. What that did was I learned to read his mood, his body language, even how he slammed the door, because I needed to read his mood. So I learned how to stay still in anticipation of a storm. I was always anxious because, is a storm approaching? Is something about to happen? And when I eventually left home for school, they would visit me on Saturday and I'd pull my mom aside and ask her, is everything okay? Just because I needed to know that everything was okay. Nothing was happening in my absence. In university, I'll get to the phone booth to go and make a phone call to check. When I look at all those patterns, I knew that it was just me trying to take care of everything, right? And it became something that I did by default because it was just me. I never thought about myself. Now, when my therapist will ask me, how did that make me feel? I will talk about everyone else but myself because I didn't know how to express how things affected me. I just bottled it up. If no one asked me how I was feeling, no one is asking me. So that's it. I will have to deal with it myself. So I learned to rely on myself emotionally. I learned not to rely on anyone emotionally. I had no expectations of anyone, which was bad. So then when somebody did something and I cut them off, I will not explain myself. I will not explain to them. I didn't feel like I needed to hear any explanation because I had no expectations, And so my therapist told me that, it's something we say, but you have to have expectations, but I have to learn how to manage my expectations. So now, do you understand resetting the boundary? I have expectations. I expect that if I am friends with someone, if I have a relationship with someone, these are expectations that they have to meet, and then I expect them to meet them. But if they don't meet them, it's got nothing to do with me as a person, or I had to try to make them do it. All I just had to know was that they were not giving me their time. And so I had to reset the boundary. But I didn't know that at first. And it was just a pattern that had been created from my experiences. And I was just acting on them. Naturally. So I will say, look, if they can't be bothered, whatever, I'll just I don't have any expectations. But I had to, you can't, do you realize what I'm saying? You can't live your life not having expectations. God has expectations of us. We have expectations of him. And that's the same relationship he wants us to have with people. That's why he says, if you want to have friends, show yourself friendly. That means that God expects us to act in a certain way towards our friends. And that's expectation. But I was then telling myself, no, don't have expectations, which means that already I have started off on the wrong foot. So it took therapy for me to get back to that space and understand and deal with it. I realized that in hindsight, it was a need for me to make sure everything was okay, like I said, when it came to calling home. And the thing is, parents often assume that because children, rarely speak up about what is happening or about how they feel about conflict or any situations such as grief, war, accidents, abuse, any kind of abuse, be it they seeing it or they experiencing it, grief, and children who grow up in high conflict homes. Now they feel like they will get over it, but they don't if you don't help them, because the reason they say nothing is because they don't have the power to do anything. Do you get what I mean? They don't have the power. They are powerless. So in that light, what do you want them to do? Right? They don't have any power, so they will not be able to do anything. They will not be able to express anything. Now, bear in mind that these situations are creating a path in their the neurobiology of their brain, and impacts greatly on what choices they make. Now, until they dig up the root or seed, it will continue to bear fruits. So for me, my seed was taking responsibility, trying to be the best that I can be, because you've been tagged as you're just like your mother. Now you see your mother being criticized all the time, being attacked all the time, being insulted all the time. She's doing her best. You can see she's doing her best, but everything was looked at in the lenses of critique. And if you're just like her, then you are striving not to be just like her. Even though the words have been said to you, you've not expressed anything, but they've created an impression and a path, and you're just trying your best. You know what I mean? Thinking that you're not already, now you feel like you're not worthy enough. So can you imagine having to deal with everything else and trying to prove a point, and then dealing with the conflict, not having the power to stop it, being anxious? Listen, it's a lot. So, and then in all of that, you're still trying to maintain a certain graciousness through the whole situation. You get me? So, I mean, that's a lot. So the seed, the roots, and so it will bear the fruits of trauma or chaos planted, because they will try to deal with the fruits. I try to deal with the fruits of everything. Or I'm anxious, I'm exactly how I should be, I'm this, I'm that. But I didn't even realize that seed, sometimes as I read and I do research for the podcast, then something comes to me and I have a journal and I write it in my journal, and then I go back to what memory triggered that, and then I deal with it. So that's why I say healing is a process. Therapy helps you. So if I find something after the initial therapy sessions, your therapist will let you go on and practice the things. Sometimes when I need her, I just send her a message and I tell her, oh, this is what happened, and I identified this, and this is what I thought about it. Is this a better approach? And that's how I have been living now. I have an intentionality about the choices that I make and the references that I make and the things that I allow to create a path for me, because what that does it affects us. And these, you see, some of the incidents, the funny thing, some of the incidents I knew they happened, but I never even thought that deeply about why I acted the way it was, till I started asking myself those questions after therapy. Whilst reading about childhood trauma, I came across a paper by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's a medical doctor at the University of Medicine, the medicine department of the University of Boston, and they talk about the trauma center, and they talk about trauma and how it affects children. Now they mentioned in the paper that exposure to trauma affects what children anticipate, focus on, and how they organize, the way they appraise and process information. Now, what that is doing is, all through the years of the trauma, they process and anticipate and appraise information through those lenses. So it becomes a pattern. Do you understand? It becomes a pattern for the rest of their lives based on that trauma. Now, that trauma and that experience in itself is flawed. So, on the premise of the choices that they are making, all of those choices are flawed. But they don't know any better because that's the path that is created, right? So, now these cause alterations in threat perception and are expressed in how they think, feel, behave, and regulate their biological systems. And I would add thoughts, because they create thoughts and patterns. If it alters perceptions and feelings and expressions, it creates that. Now, a one-time traumatic event can affect a child as much as exposure to a chronic trauma. So, and every child is different. So you can't decide for the child that this isn't traumatic enough or that's not traumatic enough. Sometimes we even say, oh, it wasn't traumatic, it was not anything, it's normal, right? It's normal. But for every child, it's different. So you will find that whilst one child in that particular household is able to overcome it, another child in another household is not able to overcome it. So every one of them has to be addressed differently. Now, these impact greatly on attention and dissociation, physical problems and difficulties in self-concept, and even the capacity to negotiate interpersonal relationships, because they are looking at the interpersonal relationships through the lens of the trauma. And that's how come children who live in homes where one parent was abusive, or even both of them, all either become abusive or victims of abuse, because they process it differently. Do you understand? It's just a path that has been created. No matter how much they run away from it, the path is there. So then it comes full circle until someone decides to do the healing. I know if you listen to the previous episodes, I touch on things that we call generational curses, which are just parts that have been created in the brain and then impact on our choices and actions and inactions, right? So this is a further exposition on it. And as I learn and I try to apply it and unlearn and relearn good good boundary setting patterns, good thoughts, good ideas, it's really hard for me because it's something that I have done for a very long time, like over 40 years of my life. So if, for instance, I started learning those patterns at the 10th year of my life or the 9th year of my life as a way to survive, it's been over 30 years. Imagine doing something regularly. They say for something to become a habit, you need to do it for 30 days. Now, listen, I've done it for 30 years. So can you imagine? So it requires consistent, intentional deposits in your pattern of thoughts so that you unlearn, relearn, refocus. So to become a better person for yourself, for your children, and generations after you, because you obviously know better and you do not want to carry those same patterns into the next generation, right? So now, when these impact greatly on these things, it's either they are given or they are not given at all. They are not taking any crap or they are taking all the crap. There's no balance, there's no balance. Or for me, I took a lot of responsibility for things even when I didn't have to. And even when I felt like I was the wrong party and I had to speak up at some point in my life, I didn't. And I didn't have any boundaries because all I did was walk away, thinking, you know what, I don't want to deal with it. But in having a conversation with my therapist, I realized that it stemmed from the need to always keep the peace at home. So me walking away from issues that I should have even addressed was just me trying to keep peace, and I felt that I needed to do that all the time. So what those particular people who pushed those boundaries did was they kept on pushing me because they knew I wouldn't respond, and they said mean, nasty things to me, but I just walked away. Now bear in mind that whatever children see and know does impact on choices, actions, and inactions, because they feel like if I act in a certain way, this will happen. If I don't act at all, then I'm avoiding it. So there's avoidance as well. And I use avoidance a lot. Even when people had clearly stepped on my toes, I will just walk away from it. So then what that happened was, I stepped on her toe. She didn't say anything. Now I'm going to put a boulder on it and see if she will still not say anything. So then the boundaries are clearly not set. And it was especially for people that I cared about. Now, don't even come near me with that crap if we didn't have any of those, we didn't have any bond. So it's not because I didn't know how to set boundaries, but for the people that I cared about, I didn't have any boundaries, which was also wrong. That you care about people doesn't mean you shouldn't have boundaries, because caring about people also comes with respect, right? And mutual respect is key, right? So all those things happened. Now, the problem is sometimes you're usually unaware that childhood patterns are the cause of the actions or inactions. I felt I was just a peaceable person. I didn't want to, deal with it. Let me just walk away from it and be the better person. We're talking about spiritual bypass, and especially me being a Christian and everything. You know what? I'll just go and pray and forgive them. No offense. Blah blah blah. But it was just a pattern that was being created. If somebody upset me, I had every right to say, you know what? You've done A, B, C, D. I didn't like it. This is how it made me feel. I would appreciate it if next time we took things this way. Maybe it will even be a misunderstanding, and then they will say, I didn't mean it for it to affect you this way, and blah blah blah, and have a conversation about it, and then we move on from it. Because I believe that holding grudges is a waste of time, because what it does is it just, what are you holding the grudge for? It just affects you and weighs you down, right? So you let it go and you just move on. So I let a lot of things go, but I never really confronted those things. But then it impacted on how I treated someone else or another situation. You get what I mean? So yes, the person will offend you. You can say it, deal with it. Or sometimes you cannot say it at all and let it go, right? But there are things and patterns that had created a path in my mind, and I was holding on to it, right into adulthood. They say that you attract your biggest fear. And in this case, I would say that some of our biggest fear have stemmed from trauma, from childhood abuse, or childhood trauma, And so you see what I mean by the paths. So then the paths are created and the patterns reoccur, and what you fear the most happens again because you didn't deal with the root or the seed that had been sown. You get what I mean? So some of the fears are there and they are subconscious and you're acting on them, but you think that it's not anything, but they are there. That's why I advocate for, listen, therapy was a game changer for me. It's helped me, my spirituality, my relationships, myself, my business, my mindset. Everything has turned because I'm thinking through things and I'm just not acting based on patterns, right? Because not every pattern is good for you, right? You've got to understand that. Not every pattern is good for you. So the things that I've subconsciously acted on that have not been good for me, I am trying to unlearn them. Now, we need to commit to digging, recognizing trauma, unlearning and relearning, because it will affect you. Now, my trauma didn't allow me to speak up for myself often, not because I couldn't, but because I just wanted not to deal with the problem. if I play dead, it'll probably go away, right? And in some of the cases, some of the conflicts happened with the same people over and over and over again till I walked away. And then I became very brutal at cutting people off, because I also identified that the more room you gave them, the more they took. And I was also extremely overcommitted to the people I cared about, because I gave them too much room. Now, I know that these three scenarios are so extreme, but that's what it is. There's no balance, because those are the patterns that had been created. There was no balance when you were creating that pattern. So it's either this or that. You get what I mean? So I'm still learning how to navigate the old coping mechanisms and readjusting to balance. But the one thing I'm thankful for, like I always say, is therapy, prayer, meditation, and the support of a few people who've just told me, look, you can do better. Everything will be okay. Just take one day at a time. And all of you listening to the podcast, because then you spare me on to go and find information that makes me better. And I hope that also educates you and gets you to think about your own experiences. This is the whole point of having these conversations, that we'll look at them through our own lenses and the different experiences that we had growing up, and help us to be better. Even if it's one person, two people, that's the whole generation of people that are learning and relearning is going to change, and I'm here for it, So this is a learning process for me. It's a learning curve for me. I strive to do better. I strive to be better, and I hope that it inspires you to also take a look at yourself, to be better for yourself and the generations after you, and your own interpersonal relationships, because that's what this is all about. At the end of the day, God says the greatest of it all is love. And love has to do with our interpersonal relationships, be it with our family, with our friends, with our colleagues, with our spouses. The central theme running through it is love, because we care about them. Now, so if you care about people, won't you want to have the best version of yourself interacting with them? And this, for me, is the journey that I have embarked on, and I hope to share with you, so that we can all be better and do better. I'm not becoming a whole new person. I feel like I'm becoming a better person. I'm trying to do away with unhealthy patterns, and also figuring out how to not let it affect my thoughts, and how to adjust. It's not always a pretty process for me. There are some days that I fail wholly, woefully I fail, but I also go back and say, you know what, you've been doing this for years. Rest easy on yourself. Go back to the drawing table and do it again. So I have my declarations, I have my affirmations. I say them to myself. I am worthy of love. I am worthy of all the good things that I attract. I am worthy of good thoughts. I am worthy of good friendships. I am worthy of respect. Because I need to attract those things to myself, and I need to create the path. Like I said, God didn't tell us to meditate on His word because of nothing, because He knows that it will create a path in our brain, and it will build our confidence, and it will make us better people. So some of these things are things that we need to do for ourselves and our children. Trauma you don't even know or think anything of can affect you. Look deep. Talk to a therapist, unlearn, relearn, release, pray, and break the cycle for you and the generations after you, because it will affect you and them. Let it end with you. Look, being a cycle breaker is not a joke. Trust me, I am on that journey. But it is worth it. It is fulfilling, it's eye-opening, and it creates a whole new shift. I was on a strategy retreat a few weeks ago, courtesy of the fabulous Akosia Saminu, and it was held by Ewa Hansen Kwao, and she mentioned seismic shifts. And that's how I feel like when you understand your own traumas and how it affects you, and you add prayer to it and the declarations, there will be a seismic shift. There's no way that things will not change for the better, turned upside down for the better. And God knows that. That's why He said, meditate, pray, do not fear, do not be anxious, because He knows those things create patterns, right? So I've said enough for today. Your children are watching. Do it for them. That's all I will say. Your children are watching. Do it for them. Let their experience not be what you had. Because what it is those patterns will live through you and be passed on to them. So now that you know better, do better. As always, this is Conversations with Amma, and this has been Amma, MFR, Tinkerbell, Emmy, M, Doris, whichever one you call me by. As always, thank you for pressing play, and I love you loads. Let me know what you think. Share, subscribe, star, review, tell somebody about the podcast. Give me feedback. Let's just have a conversation. I appreciate all of you, and thank you for sharing your Friday or any other time with me. God bless.